Thank you for joining me for Chapter 2 of the reading of Guide to Extinctionism, the book. Chapter 2, Morality and Empathy. Morality means different things to different people, but morality as an idea is almost completely worthless, meaningless, and unimportant compared to empathy. If you have empathy, do you need morality? Do you need to rely on a code which society made up and refer back to it? For extinctionists, empathy is absolute king. It's the only real motivation for helping end suffering and victims. Any other motivation is selfish and might benefit some sufferers. So you cannot really be extinctionist without empathy. Maybe in some hypothetical, but in the real world where physical, financial demands, etc., are upon you, there's very little chance that you will do activism for extinctionism if you don't actually care about the victims. We've seen many people claim to be extinctionist, to understand extinctionism, but when it comes down to it, it's their ego drawing them to the idea, and so ultimately they can't get it. Some people are drawn to extinctionism because they like extreme ideas, or because they selfishly want to see the world destroyed. Extinctionists hold ending suffering as the most important thing in the world. With a choice between contributing to the pleasure of one life form or alleviating the suffering of another, it is almost universally accepted that helping the sufferer is more important, especially when there's no discrimination to get in the mix. Pro-lifers can agree to this. They are reasonably rational as long as it doesn't impinge upon nature's directive. But even though pro-lifers can seem like good people, when push comes to shove, they do not have the consistent rules or morality. And this is central to the division, war, etc., which ravages society and the world. While they have enough intelligence and empathy to have a civilization, a happy family, etc., they don't have enough rationality or empathy to ensure the world is good. Instead, they maintain division and avoid unification, thus maintaining their nature-given priorities. For extinctionists, morality is objective. With enough information, it can be measured, defined, and agreed upon. It is only the forced apathy and irrationality which humans suffer from nature which obscures this. If you have empathy and rationality, you can understand that suffering is bad. Many pro-lifers can't even get that simple concept. They see it as a macro problem, as they do with many of the issues related to extinctionism. As in, they will treat the world almost as a singular life form, claiming that we shouldn't chop off the head to cure a broken leg. By the same token, they would allow the world to burn and suffer horrifically as long as it survived. They almost treat the world as one life form which is desperate to live no matter the cost. The individual has effectively no value in such a system, and no amount of partial suffering or even complete suffering can justify global suicide. It's always important to see all of their irrationalities as a reflection of nature, not people. Pro-lifers are victims to nature too. They're essentially slaves being used for nature's purposes. It would be ideal to free them from this, and some may claim that would be wrong, that it would be wrong to change people, to disrespect their consent and forcefully change their personality. The reality is that this is yet another trick by nature. If we could cure pro-lifers, they would almost certainly hate the idea and find it morally reprehensible. But ultimately, that is just nature's position on it. Pro-lifers will cling to any defense against extinction, wielding claims of morality, such as extinction goes against consent, therefore it is immoral. But these claims are merely defense mechanisms. they are not thought out or logically based. Obviously, anyone caring about consent violations would support putting an end to them with extinction, not letting them continue uncontrolled for billions of years. They tend to ignore, avoid, or strawman the extinctionist side of the argument, which pleads for the ending and prevention of billions of years of suffering for virtually incalculable life forms. And instead, they focus on whichever weak argument nature forces them to adopt. It is very much clear that nature bends the mind to its purposes, and that the inconsistent positions of pro-lifers are merely reflections of that. And this is all very demonstrable too. It's quite possible to prove to pro-lifers that they are irrational. I've done it several times. And I don't mean simply providing an effective counter-argument to pro-life positions. I mean demonstrating irrefutably that they are irrational. It's important to first trap them, or they will simply run away, which is why pro-lifers almost never debate us live. Then you can point out their inconsistencies in a way which they have to accept. But ultimately, this sort of thing being possible, even getting a pro-lifer to admit that they're irrational, isn't surprising or fruitful. Pro-lifers can't be correct by definition. And even if you do prove your point to them for a moment, nature will still control them. So it's pointless trying to convince pro-lifers. Perhaps if society became extinctionist, like sheep they would follow, without actually understanding it. Or perhaps they would rebel. The point is that pro-lifers aren't even capable of being fully moral, or even understanding what morality is actually all about. The same goes for rationality. Humanity has spent thousands of years spinning its wheels in the mud over philosophy without gaining anything of value. Philosophy sounds cool, like the answer to all of life's secrets, but when you look into it, it's simply a bunch of people speaking gibberish. Sure, some philosophers do analytical work for organizations, but nothing in philosophy really makes sense to your average person on the street or has any impact on their lives. So essentially, philosophy is an entirely useless field, even though it should be elevating humanity beyond war and division. Instead of touching on real-world subjects, philosophy meanders into the abstract and useless. Suffering-focused ethics and philosophy is the only thing that actually has any value of merit in terms of philosophy. In a world with trillions of sufferers and victims, pontificating about the meaning of life when there isn't one is quite a useless and selfish endeavour. Extinctionists or empaths, whatever you wish to call them, are capable of valuing the suffering of others equally or more than their own. While pro-lifers call this suicidal empathy, we would do the opposite and say that it's a good thing. It is this ability of empaths that gives us a chance at ending suffering. It is this ability that gives us a chance of ensuring that what is actually good prevails, instead of what nature is lying about being good. Without it, as mentioned before, pro-lifers will let the victims suffer without limit for nature's mandate of continued existence. If we valued our own existence more, like pro-lifers usually do, then in the grand scheme of things, the victims would be doomed, just expendable pawns in a pro-lifer's world. Extinctionists try to be good people because of empathy. It is this empathy which drives us to want a fair world for all and to be unable to abide by extreme suffering. It especially makes it difficult to enjoy pleasures carefree while ignoring the plight of the many, which is what pro-lifers advocate for. If we did live in a world completely free of suffering, extinctionists would be the ones trying to make sure everything was optimized and fair for everyone. But we live instead in a world where, even with a pro-lifer's attempts to reduce suffering, The number of victims to suffer lives they'd have been much, much, much better off not living by the time the heat death rolls around is even more incomprehensible and vast than the geographical vastness of the universe. Pro-lifers refuse to acknowledge or advocate for these victims. Again, because they can't. It would violate nature's priorities. It is ironic that pro-lifers are the ones that believe in a god, and yet extinctionists are more god-like in terms of the ideal god. One who is benevolent and fair. I imagine pro-lifers would like to think that God would suffer for them, put himself on the cross for them. Obviously, it depends on the religion, but most people generally would like to think of God as the perfect caretaker, one who wouldn't blink to put the well-being of others first, one who would do everything possible to do the right thing, one who would ensure ultimate fairness and goodness. A God that would allow unlimited victims and extreme suffering for the sake of the very, very few at the top is not one that makes sense. A God that allows children to be raped to death is not one that makes sense. Nature's version of God is, of course, a pretty wicked one. Our version, when we think of what a God in concept should be, and bear in mind we're atheist, is what you would actually want. An understanding and loving parent, not one that sends you to hell for all eternity for something which wasn't even your fault. Even Hitler didn't ask to be born and didn't ask to be given the personality he was. Anyway, the reason I mention religion and God is because that sensical version of a God I mention is one that would strive for maximum empathy and rationality. It is one that would go to great lengths to make sure that they were doing the right thing. So in that sense, extinctionists try to hold themselves to the same standard a god would. However, it's not divinity which makes extinctionists what they are. It's mainly just empathy. If you have enough empathy, then you are forced to care about the suffering of others as much as your own, if not more. Then you will be driven to find a rational way to do the right thing for them and for everyone. But it isn't suicidal empathy or over-the-top empathy. Actually, it is simply universal empathy. Instead of empathy being gate-kept by nature, yes, morality for your family, but not for the animal you eat tonight. Empathy is now not supercharged, but simply normal, fixed. It is this same universal empathy which would make an extinctionist motivated to end any suffering. The fairness extinctionists strive towards includes doing the right thing even when it's difficult, awkward, or would impose upon the pleasure of the many. Star Trek New Worlds actually did an episode about a planet that thrives, but has to sacrifice a child to be tortured for their whole life every now and then. Pro-lifers who are currently doing this in practice would say that the good of the many outweighs the plight of the few. This is another trick by nature, of course. Without this trick, people wouldn't be capable of enjoying such a society. They would be forced by empathy and fairness to do the right thing for the children who get tortured. How could you enjoy your life, knowing a child is being tortured because of you, and that you could save them by giving up your decadence? So, even with just one victim at stake, extinctionists would be rallying just as much. Empathy would be rallying just as much. Not just to save that victim, but to prevent any victims ever happening again. Without racism, division, war, tribalism, or nature's tricks, one has to wonder what humanity would look like. Star Trek comes to mind. More of a caretaker attitude would develop. Currently, it's just every man for himself, which is why the least empathetic people rise to the highest positions of power. But if we came together as a species and decided what goals to pursue, We would have a choice between standing by and allowing the most innocent to suffer experiences so bad that they are beyond imagination, while pursuing selfish things like entertainment and colonization, or putting an end to suffering once and for all for as many life forms as physically possible. If we lived in heaven, then it would be a different story. But we live in a world where the vast majority are in what is effectively hell, and new victims will be put into this hell for billions of years unless we stop it. The only problem is that if we do that, we won't be able to have our fun. Obviously, for extinctionists, that isn't a problem. Thank you for listening to Chapter 2. Again, I would appreciate all and any feedback, and I will begin writing Chapter 3. Thank you and stay tuned.